The painted sky, sanctuary, sat cradled in the rust-red foothills of northern Arizona, where junipers stood like quiet sentinels over the dry earth, and the sky always seemed a little too wide. It was a place meant for healing: scarred wolves, limping pumas, rescued raptors. Each creature there had a story and a wound. But no animal had ever stirred the heart of the place quite like Ayla. Ayla had arrived nearly 6 months earlier from a failed roadside zoo in Florida. The scars on her body were invisible, the kind no one could name, but everyone could feel. She was young for a cheetah, barely 5, but already her gaze carried the weight of long journeys. The first few weeks, she wouldn't eat unless someone sat with her. She didn't run, didn't vocalize, didn't even lift her head when the wind swept through the tall grass of her enclosure. Just stared at the fence, as if waiting for something, or someone, she'd lost. It was Maren Voss, the 47-year-old director of the sanctuary, who first earned Ayla's trust. Every morning, Maren would sit just outside the gate of the cheetah habitat with a worn canvas journal in her lap and a thermos of coffee that steamed in the cool dawn air. She never spoke to Ayla. Not at first. She simply existed near her, breathing the same quiet morning and allowing time to do its slow work. And one day, Ayla walked up and sat beside her on the other side of the fence, both of them watching the sun rise. That was the beginning. But the real story, the one no one could have imagined, began with a howl. Not the long, echoing cry of a coyote, not the screech of a hawk overhead. This sound was lower, rougher, more startled than anything Maren had heard in her 2 decades of wildlife care. She stood frozen, the shovel in her hand dripping water from where she'd just rinsed the feeding bowls, and listened. Then the radio crackled. Maren?" It was Tobias. He was 29, lean and awkward, with a voice that always sounded like he was halfway between laughter and panic. "You need to come down to the south gate, now." She didn't ask questions, just ran. The south gate was barely used, more a service entrance than a true visitor path, but as she approached, Maren could already see that something was wrong. The fencing there had been clawed, deep gouges tearing through the mesh like it had been paper. But that wasn't what stole her breath. It was the animal slumped at the base of the gate. A bobcat. His body was narrow and wiry, but powerful. Dust clung to his fur in thick clumps, and his right hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle. There was blood, dark and dried, caked into the scruff of his neck. But it was his eyes, sharp, amber, defiant, despite his collapse, that held her. "Did he try to get in?" she asked, breathless. Tobias nodded, pointing to the claw marks. "Tried. Maren, he almost did." They should have sedated him, waited for animal control. But something in her resisted. This bobcat hadn't come by accident. He hadn't wandered through the desert by mistake. There was a purpose to the way he had dragged himself across the canyons and pastures, like he was searching for something, and had finally found it. Maren crouched slowly, letting her shadow fall across him, careful not to meet his gaze directly. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly. The bobcat didn't move. His ears twitched. His breathing was shallow, rattling, but his body stayed still. And so as gently as she could, Maren took off her jacket, wrapped it around his frame, and with Tobias's help, lifted him into the sanctuary. They named him Rowan. For days, Rowan said nothing. Of course, he wasn't the kind of creature to speak in any way that humans could measure, but his silence was louder than a roar. Even injured, even sedated, he paced. His broken leg had to be pinned with rods, and yet he tried to run. Not away, from something. Toward something. Ayla. It began with the staring. The moment he was placed in a recovery enclosure near the eastern fence, Rowan found her. The cheetah. Ayla. Their enclosures weren't connected. They weren't even close. But he would sit with his body trembling and his golden eyes fixed on the distant figure reclining in the shade. Ayla didn't seem to notice him at first, but Maren did. "He's not watching the fence," she murmured one morning, peering through binoculars. "He's watching her." Briggs, the sanctuary's senior handler, frowned. "They're both solitary species. They're not even from the same continent." "I know," Maren said, "but look at them." And so they watched, for days, weeks. Rowan, in his slow recovery, always angled himself toward Ayla. And Ayla, aloof, silent, broken, began to watch him back. It was a staring contest that no one understood. And yet something inside Maren whispered that maybe, just maybe, they did. The idea was ludicrous. Introduce a wild bobcat to a traumatized cheetah. Any other sanctuary would have dismissed it out of hand. But Painted Sky wasn't like other places. It didn't run on protocols. It ran on trust, on instinct, on things that couldn't be measured. And one morning, as Ayla lay beneath the cottonwood tree in her habitat, ears pricked and posture alert, Maren whispered into her radio, "Let's try." Briggs didn't argue. He just nodded. The team prepared for the introduction with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for funerals or weddings. Tranquilizers were loaded but hidden. Emergency gates were tested. And the middle yard, a neutral zone, was filled with enrichment distractions, escape platforms, and food rewards. But no one was prepared for what happened next. They opened the gate. Rowan, still limping slightly from his recovery, didn't rush through. He sniffed the dirt, pawed at a weed. The most unceremonious entrance imaginable. It was Ayla who noticed first. She rose, tall, golden, poised like a poem carved into muscle. Her head tilted as she saw him, really saw him, in her space. For one breathless second, Maren feared the worst. But Ayla didn't growl. She didn't hiss. She purred. It was low and trembling, a sound that echoed through the marrow of every human watching. Rowan froze. He arched instinctively, tail puffed and back curved like a bow. But his paws didn't move. He stayed still, watching her. And then, step by step, she walked toward him. At first, no one breathed. Rowan's shoulders tensed, every wither of muscle under his scruffy coat twitching with uncertainty. Ayla stood still, just 10 feet up from him now, her tail low but relaxed, her body poised with a kind of cautious grace. It wasn't the stance of a predator about to strike. It was something gentler, curious, a question, not a warning. From the deck above the yard, Maren's voice came through the radio like a prayer. "Let them work it out. No movement unless absolutely necessary." Briggs and Tobias stood beside her, tranquilizer rifles loosely in hand, hearts hammering. They weren't afraid of blood. They were afraid of what failure would mean. For Ayla, for Rowan, for everything they thought they understood about wildness and healing. Rowan's ears twitched forward. He lowered his head slowly, nostrils flaring. Ayla mirrored the motion, And then, with the awkward courage of a creature more heart than finesse, Rowan took one step forward. They were nose to nose. A whisper of wind passed through the acclimation yard. A single leaf tumbled between them, unnoticed. Their breaths synced, briefly, beautifully. And then Rowan broke the spell. He flinched. Maybe her scent was too strong. Maybe her presence cracked something open inside him. But he stepped back, not with aggression, but with the clumsy hop of a cat unused to gentleness. His back paw dragged slightly, the heeled leg still stiff. A small hiss escaped him, more confused than hostile. Ayla didn't respond with teeth. She sprang backward, not afar, just enough to give space. Her body coiled instinctively, but then eased again. She blinked at him. Once, twice, a gesture so subtle only a handler would recognize it. Maren did. "She's calming him," she whispered. The two cats stood apart, an invisible current stretching between them. Taut, fragile, alive. Rowan's breathing slowed. His tail twitched, but didn't lash. And after a long moment, Ayla did something no one expected. She turned her body sideways. It was an ancient signal in feline language. "I'm not a threat." Rowan watched her, torn between instinct and something deeper. His body held centuries of wildness. But his heart, that was something else entirely. Slowly, so slowly, he mimicked her, shifted his body just enough to expose his side. He blinked back. The sanctuary crew exhaled as one. "That's progress," Briggs murmured, lowering the rifle barrel an inch. The next few minutes passed in delicate, measured silence. Ayla walked a short loop through the yard, her limbs long and fluid, not straying too close to Rowan, but always within sight. Rowan tracked her with his eyes, but didn't follow. Not yet. Then, to break the lingering tension, Maren gave a small signal. Tobias tossed 2 small meatballs, cat-safe treats seasoned with liver and pumpkin, into the center of the yard. Ayla didn't move. But Rowan, guided more by his stomach than nerves, limped toward one. He sniffed it, then took it between his teeth, sitting down to eat. Ayla approached hers slowly. She didn't crouch to eat. She remained standing, eyes on Rowan, chewing daintily, every muscle still alert. For a full 10 minutes, they did nothing more than exist in each other's presence. It was a miracle in slow motion. Then Ayla flicked her tail. It wasn't much, just a little whip through the dust, catching a stray curl of dry grass and tossing it aside. But it was enough. Rowan pounced. It wasn't predatory. It was wild instinct, playful and absurd. He landed 2 feet wide of the flicked grass and sprawled unceremoniously on his side, eyes wide in shock. He hadn't meant to move. He hadn't planned to play. Ayla blinked, tilted her head. Then she did something no one expected from a cheetah raised in a cage and robbed of her purpose. She crouched and leapt. Not at Rowan, but beside him, bounding over his body like a dancer clearing an invisible hurdle, landing lightly and spinning to face him again. Rowan scrambled up, tail flicking wildly now. The handlers froze. "They're playing," Maren breathed. Briggs didn't believe her at first, but then he saw it. Rowan crouched again, this time more confident, his stubby tail whipping like a child's flag in the wind. Ayla bounced sideways, tossing her front paws playfully in the dust. They weren't fighting. They were testing. Rules, boundaries, each other. It was a dance. And for 10 breathtaking minutes, they circled, darted, leapt, and froze. Rowan with his boxy frame and short bursts of speed. Ayla with her liquid movements and exaggerated bounces. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. They were learning the rhythm of each other. Eventually they stopped. Not from fear, from exhaustion. Rowan flopped in the shade of a flat stone near the fence line, panting with his tongue lolling. Ayla settled 5 feet away on a patch of warm grass, her head high, but her eyes half-lidded. They didn't look at each other, but they didn't need to. Something had shifted. That night, Maren stayed long after the others left. The stars were high above painted sky, the moon still hidden behind the ridges. She sat on the viewing deck alone, arms wrapped around herself, watching the 2 shapes rest in their separate corners of the yard. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't magic. It was slow, complicated, and entirely too fragile. But it was real. A broken bobcat had wandered into cheetah territory, and the world had not ended. It had begun. The next morning, the painted sky sanctuary woke early. Fog clung low to the ground, curling around the cedar fence posts and turning the air into soft silver. In the acclimation yard, the grass was damp with dew. From her shaded corner beneath the sycamore tree, Ayla lifted her head and watched. Across the clearing, Rowan was already awake, though awake might have been generous. He sprawled on his back in a patch of warm soil, paws twitching in his sleep, his mouth opening and closing like he was dreaming of chewing something stubborn. Maren, watching from the blind behind the observation screen, smiled. The 2 cats had spent the previous afternoon in an awkward orbit. Not quite companions, not quite strangers. Ayla had followed Rowan along the fence for nearly 20 minutes, always 5 paces behind. He'd pretended not to notice, but his tail had twitched just a bit more than usual. When Ayla had laid down near him, not too close, but not far either, Rowan had sniffed once, sighed, and let her stay. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was no longer fear. And now, as the first rays of sunlight slanted into the yard, something new was about to be tested. From behind the fence, one of the junior handlers, Tay, released a small box into the grass. It clicked open with a quiet snap. Inside was a grasshopper, huge, vibrant green, the kind that might have lived a week longer in a safer world. It sprang once, landing clumsily in front of Ayla. Her body changed instantly. The soft, curious observer vanished. A predator emerged, her shoulders lowered, her long legs coiled beneath her, her pupils narrowed to slits. For the first time since her arrival at Painted Sky, Ayla looked like a cheetah again. Not a refugee, not a patient, but something ancient and wild. Rowan stirred. His ears flicked toward her. His eyes blinked open. He didn't know what she'd seen yet, but he recognized the shift. He rose slowly, limping slightly, and followed her gaze. Then he saw it. The grasshopper moved again. Without a sound, Rowan dropped into a crouch. It was pure instinct. His time in suburban backyards, in vet clinics, in recovery pens. None of it had dulled the spark that lived in his bones. That ancient, buried drive to chase, to catch, to act. Ayla tensed. So did Rowan. 2 cats, 2 shapes, 2 shadows holding breath. Then Ayla leapt. It was a blur of spotted gold and dust, A split second later, Rowan launched himself too, his legs shorter, his leap lower, but his focus just as sharp. The grasshopper vanished mid-air. They collided, not violently, but comically, meeting in a puff of dry grass and pause and surprise. Ayla skidded sideways. Rowan rolled over once, ending up on his back, all four paws flailing. Silence followed. Just the sound of panting, of paws scraping dirt. The grasshopper had escaped. Their hunt had lasted 4 seconds, and yet neither seemed to mind. Ayla turned to Rowan. He was still lying there, dust on his nose, breathing hard. She took a few steps forward, her long tail twitching. Then, without warning, she leaned down and licked the tip of his ear. It was quick, rough, pure feline, and utterly unexpected. Rowan sat up fast, eyes wide, ears flattened. What was that? A thank you? An insult? A declaration of war? He looked at her. Ayla looked back. Neither moved, and then Rowan did something Maren had never seen him do. Not once, not even in private. He chirped, a tiny sound, a bobcat's odd, bird-like vocalization. Not aggression, not distress. Just surprise, curiosity, maybe even affection. On the deck above the yard, Tobias whispered, "Did he just chirp?" "He did," Maren replied, her voice cracking. It was more than a sound. It was a surrender. Ayla, emboldened, plopped down beside him. Not touching, not invading, just there. Her breathing calmed. Her head tilted slightly towards him. And Rowan? He didn't move away. That evening, as the sky turned from copper to violet, the two cats lay only a few feet apart. No fence, no barriers, just space, just silence, and the understanding that something had shifted again. Not because of the game, not because of the failed hunt, but because in that dusty, ridiculous moment, chasing a grasshopper, they'd seen themselves reflected in the other. Flawed, feral, recovering. Alone, they had fought their way through trauma. Together, they were remembering joy. And at the edge of the yard, just out of view, Maren wiped her face with her sleeve and whispered, "They're not just surviving anymore. They're healing." The calm didn't last. It rarely does in sanctuaries. 2 days after the grasshopper moment, Ayla and Rowan had begun sharing the yard full-time. They slept near each other now, Ayla curled in the shade, Rowan often sprawled on his platform, his eyes darting toward her whenever he thought no one was looking. Handlers kept their distance, giving them space. Tobias insisted on silence during observation. Every whisper could tilt the balance. But things were tilting on their own. Because Ayla had stopped eating, it wasn't refusal. It was hesitation. She'd approach her meals, fresh rabbit, shredded meatballs, treats infused with minerals, and just sniff. Then walk away. Her weight, already light, began to drop. Her eyes remained alert, but her tail no longer curled up at the tip when she walked. A subtle signal, but one Maren knew meant unease. Rowan noticed too. The bobcat had started pacing when Ayla lay too long in one place. He'd circle the yard in odd figure-eights, peeking at her from behind tree trunks, waiting for her to rise. When she didn't, he'd approach and sit nearby, not touching, but facing her. A silent guard. Tobias called a meeting. Inside the observation barn, the staff gathered around a whiteboard cluttered with photos, charts, notes on feline behavior. Ayla's intake file sat thick and grim on the table. She'd come from a failed roadside zoo in southern Florida. Concrete pens, no enrichment, no medical care, no companionship. Just 5 years of pacing and silence. "This isn't regression," Maren said. "It's recall." Something triggered her memory. "She flinched during the last thunderstorm," Tay offered. "She's been avoiding the feeding station since we put down the new water bowl," another handler added. Maren blinked. The bowl. It had been donated. Stainless steel, extra deep. But the shine, the reflection. She might be seeing herself, Maren murmured, and not recognizing what she sees. A pause. "Or she does recognize it," Tobias said, "and doesn't like what it reminds her of." They removed the bowl that afternoon, brought back her old rubber one, dull, scratched, familiar. Still, Ayla didn't eat. That evening, Rowan approached her again. The sun had dipped behind the Arizona hills. The acclimation yard was washed in pale gold. Ayla lay in her corner, not sleeping, just existing, eyes open, breathing shallow. Rowan padded over, each step cautious but determined. He stopped just 3 feet from her and dropped a shredded strip of chicken from his own food pile. It landed awkwardly in front of her paw. Ayla blinked. She looked at the meat, then at him, then back again. Rowan didn't move, just sat, eyes fixed on her, like she might vanish if he blinked. After a long pause, Ayla leaned forward and ate it. The smallest bite. But it was something. From the camera feed in the barn, the team watching burst into quiet cheers. Brenda covered her face and sobbed. Even Tobias, usually stone-faced, smiled so hard his eyes wrinkled. That one gesture, one bobcat offering a meal to a cheetah, wasn't just adorable. It was revolutionary. But the real test came 3 nights later. Thunder. A fast-moving summer storm barreled across the painted sky preserve just after sunset. Lightning spidered across the clouds. Rain slammed against the ground. Wind screamed through the pines. Ayla's old trauma returned like a ghost through the fence. She bolted. Not in the graceful way she usually moved, but in panicked, desperate lunges, her paws slipping in the mud, her chest heaving. She ran into the fencing, rebounded, ran again. Her eyes were wide, her breath ragged. Rowan woke instantly. He watched her once, confused, then recognized the fear, and ran toward it. No hesitation. He caught up to her mid-run and leaped into her path, not to block her, but to redirect. He moved in front of her, crouched low, and chirped. Not once, but 3 times. Ayla froze. She stared at him like he'd just spoken a secret only she knew. Rowan backed up slowly, guiding her, not forcing her. His stubby tail twitched, his ears forward. Another chirp, another step. He led her to the thick, sheltering trunk of the sycamore tree. There, under the wide, low branches, shielded from the worst of the storm, Ayla finally collapsed. Trembling, but safe. Rowan didn't leave her side. Not that hour. Not the next. When the rain faded to mist, they were still curled together. 2 bodies, 1 rhythm. The past still hovered in the air, but it no longer owned them. The next morning, Ayla ate her full meal, all of it. And afterward, she lay next to Rowan in the sun and placed one paw gently over his. Just for a moment, but enough to make Maren whisper, "My God, they're not healing anymore." Tobias nodded beside her, his voice barely a breath. They're saving each other. By late August, the monsoons had passed. The sanctuary was bathed in dry heat and long amber evenings. Cicadas buzzed in the cottonwoods. Coyotes yipped far beyond the outer fences, and in the center of the painted sky preserve, a bond, once impossible, had become unshakable. Ayla and Rowan were no longer a miracle. They were routine. They ate together now, every meal. Rowan still gobbled like someone might steal his portion. But now he waited until Ayla had taken her first bite. Ayla, once elegant and aloof, had learned to nudge him playfully when he pretended not to see a treat. They slept apart, but always within sight. Their rhythms synced like sunlight and shadow. And still, they surprised everyone, especially on the morning of the final test. It had been planned for weeks, a temporary, low-risk trial to introduce the pair into the larger open habitat beyond the acclimation yard. 30 acres of true wilderness within the sanctuary. Trees, rocks, brush, freedom. But no fence between them and memory. Tobias was skeptical. What if she bolts? He'd asked Maren. What if she panics and turns on him? She won't, Maren had answered, steady. Not if he's with her. The gate opened at 6:42 a.m. A breeze carried dust and pine into the yard. Rowan stepped forward immediately. Curious. Tail twitching. Ayla stood still. The open space was too big, too quiet. No barriers, no walls, no ceiling to stop the sky from falling. For a moment, it seemed her fear might root her to the ground again. But Rowan turned back. He didn't call out or nudge her. He just looked, waited, and then sat. Ayla blinked. Her chest rose with a single deep breath. And then, with cautious, measured steps, she crossed the threshold. Together, they walked into the wild. What followed wasn't dramatic. There were no attacks, no sprints, just exploration. Together. They sniffed tree trunks. Ayla climbed halfway up a rock ledge before sliding down with an un-cheetah-like huff. Rowan disappeared into a thorny bush and came out with a mouthful of burrs. The radio crackled with laughter back at the observation deck. They were learning the land. By afternoon, they reached the upper ridge, an area that overlooked most of the sanctuary's hills and low scrub valleys. From this height, everything felt open. Safe. Ayla sat down, not in tension, but in peace. Rowan padded beside her. No words, no signals, just closeness. Below them, the preserve stretched wide and endless, but the world beyond it still loomed. And it came knocking that evening. A call came into the office around 6:15 p.m. A local rancher's dog had gone missing near the preserve's northern edge. It was common. Most calls were false alarms. But this time, a drone had captured footage. A large canine, possibly a wolf-dog hybrid, had crossed the fence line 2 miles north of Ayla's new habitat. Tobias went cold. The predator was bigger than Rowan, faster than Ayla in close quarters. And worst of all, it was wild in a way neither of them were anymore. A decision had to be made. Call them in, or trust them to face it? Brenda said what no one else could. They found each other in fear. Maybe Maybe they'll stand in strength. The team watched through the drone feed as the hybrid appeared near the edge of the habitat. Ayla and Rowan were just visible in the lower field. The wind shifted. The cheetah lifted her head. She had scented him. Rowan noticed her change first. He stood, ears high, muscles coiled. The hybrid emerged from the brush, matted, thin, wild-eyed. He barked once, not in greeting, in warning. Rowan bristled, but didn't move. Ayla stepped forward. A second bark, a growl. The cheetah's golden eyes narrowed. She didn't hiss. She didn't flee. She purred. Low. Deep. That freight train sound that once scared Rowan now rumbled like thunder beneath her ribs. The hybrid paused. Ayla stepped again, closer. Her tail held low, not aggressive. Her body a message. You do not belong here. Rowan mirrored her. Smaller, yes, but fierce in his own Appalachian way. He chirped once, a sound that startled the intruder more than any roar. It worked. The hybrid, faced with unity, uncertainty, and calm power, retreated. He turned and slipped back into the underbrush. It was over. The next day, Tobias signed the approval. Permanent cohabitation. Full habitat access. No further restrictions. They earned it, he said simply. That night, under a sky streaked with stars, the preserve held its breath. On the ridge, Ayla rested with her head against a worn patch of grass. Rowan lay beside her, his back touching hers lightly. Below them, the valley lights flickered. Somewhere, coyotes sang. But the fear didn't return. In its place, belonging. 2 survivors, one from a roadside cage, one from a petting zoo gone wrong. Both scarred in ways no one could see, but stitched together now by something no one could have planned. They weren't meant to meet. But under the painted sky, they had found something rare. Not survival, but sanctuary. Not companionship, but kinship. And in a world that had taken so much from them, this was the one thing it couldn't touch.